Hey everyone, it's me, HawkeyeG, and I'm back with another Total War Warhammer 2 video. This time I'm doing a campaign starter guide for the Nagarythe faction of the High Elves. So to go alongside my faction introduction video, which will introduce you to the basic concepts of this faction, this campaign starter guide will kind of give you an overview of what the campaign looks like, how to manage various aspects of it. We're going to be looking at things like what your key buildings will be and building considerations in the early game, what your key military units might be and army compositions, how they might change for this faction, your local immediate campaign map concerns and strategies, so kind of, what are the first 10, 20 turns going to look like, and then your long-term strategy and campaign approach. So once you get that first few provinces settled and stabilized, where do you go from there? So with that being said, let's jump in and take a look. Alright, so I've loaded up a campaign that is just a few turns in, just so we can kind of get a little bit better view of the map so I can talk about some things more easily. But the first thing that we're actually going to look at is just your key buildings and building considerations. In particular, what I want to show is just kind of the building browser here and be able to talk about this and what kind of things you might want to focus on in your first province or two. So the first thing to look at here is their unique building, the Asenar camp, right? It's what gets you the unique unit for this faction, the Shadow Walkers. But it's really not that great. Like, this is not a super special building. It does have some good stats on it, right? And I think that this is a useful building to maybe put in some of your fringe provinces, right? If we're setting up the Hag Hall and I'm kind of building up defenses here, maybe a good option would be to put it in, like if I have Val's Anvil and Hag Hall, maybe I put this building in Hag Hall and put the defensive building in Val's Anvil. That way I can get some of these bonuses to make my defense in this area a little easier. But yeah, you can see like the bonuses, reduced campaign movement range for your enemies, reduced ambush and hero hero action or ambush success chance for the enemies, increased hero action success or ambush success chance for your own armies, right? So it makes your ambushes and hero actions better, it makes their actions worse, and it reduces their movement range. But I mean, besides that, it's just not... I mean, this is nice, right? This is a nice to have thing, but you're really not going to have room for it in any of your starter provinces, or at least it's not really going to be a priority. And furthermore, well, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I also don't think that the Shadow Walkers are like a super useful unit. They're good, they have a good stat line, but we'll come back to that. I don't want to talk about that. That'll come up in the next section. Really what I want to talk about is the decisions you have to make about how to build the Black Coast, right? It's challenging because you're very limited here, right? So at some point, like, you have to decide, right? Do I want this to be like an economic province, or do I want it to be like a military production province? Do I maybe want to try to pursue some buildings that I would need to unlock different kinds of research as the High Elves, right? And personally, my answer is that this shouldn't really be your main province. I would set this up as just kind of a default economic province. Keep it simple, right? Growth, income, maybe some military, like a basic military building in Bleakhold Fortress or something like that. Perhaps putting defenses here, especially in Arnheim. You don't really want your capital to get sacked or attacked. Not that it's super likely, but... I would kind of treat this as like a generic minor like province that you would take anywhere else, right? You want like growth, income, public order, and then eventually like hero capacity increases. And that's really what you're gonna like in the short term and in the long term, for the most part. The main reason for this is you don't need anything special for military. You have spearmen and archers, and they're good enough that they can carry you probably through to even turn 100 if you're using them well, or you're just taking good fights. I mean, the fact that you have the ability to ambush on attack and just generally are a more ambush focused faction, it means you don't need super powerful units. I mean, no matter who you're playing as the High Elf, spearmen and archers are going to be a good bet, right? So trying to like overdo it on military buildings is just going to slow you down, and it's going to keep this province from producing what you need, which is really money. Like, you don't need fancy military units, you just need the money to produce a lot of spearmen and archers, right? You also won't be able to build anything particularly special until you get this building to tier 4 anyway, right? Like you're really only going to have room, besides like growth, public order, and income, you're only going to have room for maybe 1 or 2 military buildings, and that's really all I'd recommend. The options I would consider, right, you could consider just the basic military building. At tier 3, this is going to give you Silverin Guard and Lothern Sea Guards. Those are good options. I'd also strongly consider the Elven Forge. Like, you could put this in this 3rd slot in Bleakhold's Fortress, right? Get the Elven Forge just for the bolt throwers, right? Spearmen, archers, bolt throwers, that's all you need for at least the first 50 turns, if not longer. I do think that the Grove is a viable option. The Great Eagle can do a couple of things that, like, it can serve the purpose of cavalry and artillery, right? You can kind of take out enemy artillery with this. You can harass enemy archers with this. And then you have like the White Lines of Shrace, which, especially against the Dark Elves, this is going to help against Dark Elf frontline infantry like the Black Ark Corsair. And the War Lines of Shrace, again, good option for chasing down ranged units. I mean, you could go cavalry, but this isn't... I don't know if I'd recommend cavalry, because they're not going to do as well against spearmen. And the Dark Elves and High Elves are going to have... I mean, everybody's going to have easy access to spearmen early on in the game. I personally don't really go for the Grove option. I'd recommend the Elven Forge, but there's nothing wrong with like doom stacking some Lothern Sea Guards early in the game, except for maybe the cost. But so those are what I think your options are for maybe 1 military building in this province. Otherwise, I really wouldn't work on that. The reason why is early in the game, you're going to want to take this province. You're going to want to take Titan Peaks. Most of the time you will be able to get all 4 settlements, if not at least 3 out of 4. And with 3 out of 4 settlements, you'll be able to grow it past Arnheim in a pretty decent amount of time. So this is where you're probably going to want to put more of your military buildings in the earlier game. And honestly, eventually, you'll be able to confederate Lothern fairly early on as well, primarily because of these missions, like the Marked for Death mechanic, right? Anytime you can get plus 20 relations with the High Elves and 38 influence. I don't think I have them on my list here, but even if I'm looking at confederating Tiranoc, right? They're already at great relations with me. That's without any bonuses from Marked for Death. That's without spending any influence on relations. If I'm getting 40 influence from a single one of these missions, like, the point is, it's not that hard to confederate the High Elves. So what I'm getting at here is you don't want to overinvest into like various buildings or trying to make your first province, the Black Coast here, a military stronghold to generate all your units from. You really just want to keep it simple here, and that's what you want to focus on at the start of the game. So with that covered, the next thing I want to talk about is like your key military units and army composition considerations, right? And I said I would come back to this. The Shadow Walkers, right? You even start with this. You start with the Asenar camp taking up your 2nd slot at the beginning of the game, and honestly, I'd recommend just removing it. Here's the thing. Okay, let's cover their pros and cons real quick. I don't want to get like super deep into this because I could probably talk about this for much longer than I need to. Okay, the advantages that Shadow Walkers have: they have poison damage on their melee and missiles. They have higher range damage than the Shadow Warriors or your standard archers. They have decent speed. They have the ability to fire while moving. They have Vanguard deployment. So in general, they're good skirmishers, right? You can kind of Vanguard deployment them and kite the enemy away while you're shooting at them. They're also pretty good in melee. They have decent melee stats: 40 melee attack, 27 melee defense. They actually have better melee attack than the White Lines of Shrace. They have poison attack, but they don't have armor piercing. Looks like they have anti-infantry or bonus versus infantry. So theoretically, these should be decent in melee. But here's the thing: the big disadvantage that you can't see here: 2-turn recruit time for local recruitment. Okay, I said they have good speed, but they don't have enough speed. Okay, this is enough to match Black Ark Corsairs. It is not enough to beat Skink cohorts. It is not enough to match. There's one other thing I think. I can't remember now. But like they're not gonna outrun cavalry, right? They're gonna like match or like barely outpace infantry. But another thing is like their health is low, right? Their armor is not super low, but it's relatively low. Especially like I said, are their melee stats better than White Lions? Sure, but their armor and their health is absolutely not, right? They also have a pretty prohibitive cost and and they have that weird spread formation, so it can make them hard to use as like standard units in an army. Now, you might say, well, we can't even see them here because I don't have it set up. We're not on turn 1. But, like, if you're looking at this from a Lithanar's army while you're watching this video, you're probably going, Hawkeye, what do you mean prohibitive cost? They have a high recruitment cost but low upkeep. Remember that a Lithanar's bonus is 50% reduced upkeep for Shadow Walkers and Shadow Warriors. So, really, he's the only lord that kind of makes them, or the only time they're really going to be super viable is putting them in his army. Otherwise, they're costly. Now, I do think that they're a well-balanced unit. They are good enough in terms of their stat line to justify the cost, right? They are a good unit. Shadow Walkers are a good unit. They're basically the best archer in the game, with the exception, or not in the game, but in your roster, with the exception of the Sisters of Avalorn, right? You could maybe make a case for Lothern Sea Guards just because of their like dual function as spearmen. But yeah, even Shadow Walkers are good like melee infantry, or decent, right? So aside from Sisters of Avalorn, these are probably your best. This is like the second best archer in the roster. But the main reason you don't want to use them is because they take 2 turns to recruit. And in the early game, that's a huge setback, right? If for any of these other units, even for Shadow Warriors, they only take 1 turn to recruit. I can move my army to its maximum length, or as long as I'm in my own territory, and then recruit troops at the end of the turn and be able to move on my following turn. If I recruit Shadow Walkers, I have to sit in place for a full turn. And also the fact that the enemy will be able to recruit like 2 turns worth of units in the time it takes me to recruit 1 set of Shadow Walkers. The Shadow Walkers are probably strong enough to justify it because, 1 Shadow Walker might be able to beat 2 units. But the main, like I said, the main point is, because you have to wait 2 turns, they're not super useful in the early game. By the time you get to the point where they might be useful, they might not be worth it. I really think that it's kind of your call whether you want to use them or not. I don't think you need to. You can just use spearmen and archers. But again, I do think that in terms of their stat line and their abilities, the cost is justified, right? The real problem is they're just like not that much better than anything unless you're putting them in a Lithanar's army and you have the bonuses for them. By the time you get some of these bonuses, you might have some better options anyway. So that's my thought on the Shadow Walkers. Hopefully that was brief enough for you. But yeah, so the point is, for this army, like for Nagarythe, I don't really recommend doing anything different than you would for a standard High Elf gameplay. Maybe do something a little bit different with the Lithanar. If you want to experiment with like Shadow Warriors or Shadow Walkers Doomstack, be my guest. It will probably work fine, but generally speaking, you just want to stick to the standard stuff for the rest of your units. Spearmen and Archers early game, add in Bolt Throwers when you can, add in heroes as they become available. I like to convert Spearmen to Silver and Guard when we have them available at Tier 3. Maybe put some Shadow Warriors or something, but basically you're just kind of holding out for like Sisters of Avalorn and Phoenix Guard in the late game. Maybe throw a couple of dragons in there, right? So those are kind of the thoughts that I have about the military units and army composition considerations. Like I said, in the early game for this faction, what you really want is just Spearmen and Archers. Keep your cost low. Maybe put that Bolt Thrower building in the Bleakhold Fortress so you can have those, and that's really all you need. I wouldn't recommend investing in Shadow Walkers early on because in a way, they'll just slow you down. If you have a good opportunity to convert some of your units to that when you're in more of like a defensive posture, or you know you'll have a couple turns to wait for something to happen, absolutely go for it. If you look at these and you're like, I just want to try them, absolutely go for it. This is the only faction you can get them on, so I'm not saying you should never touch them. But if you want to talk, like, what is my personal recommendation? I mean, you can see, delete that building, replace it with something else. With that being said, now it's time to actually talk about the immediate campaign map strategy and the concerns that we have with this actual campaign, okay? So you start out at the Black Coast here. You are at war with the Bleakhold's Dark Elves, and they are going to start with Bleakhold Fortress, Hag Hall, and Val's Anvil. And that's basically what you want to do. You want to push north, take their territory, recruit spearmen and archers as you go. Try to, watch your cost and watch your expenses. But you should be able to push them to Val's Anvil. North of there, you're going to find the Clark-Carrand Dark Elves. But this is kind of where you want to stop, right? This is like this little segment right here, Hag Hall, Val's Anvil, and I could even go and occupy Ice Rock Gorge since it's just a ruins, right? Or I could grab a lord here and send that lord over to occupy it while I take out Val's Anvil. You can get a nice 3 little settlements going here, and you can build defenses in like Hag Hall and or Val's Anvil and be able to try to lock down this province from the north. You want to do that because the next thing you're going to want to focus on is Nagarythe, right? By the time you take out the Bleakhold's Dark Elves, she's probably going to have unified this province, and after that, she's either going to attack you or she's going to attack Tiranoc. I want to say that depends on the difficulty, but in my experience, she usually goes after Tiranoc. I don't know if it on very hard or legendary difficulty. I mean, I've played on very hard, but I'm sure it depends, right? And it depends on their current military forces as well. It looks like Tiranoc's already at war with her, so she's probably going to focus on that, right? Which is what you want. That's a good thing, right? Because it makes for a great opportunity to capture some of her territory and force her to make a bad play, right? If Nagarythe's sitting out here in the ocean and you're already like encamped here in her territory, you could run down and take the Moon Shard, cut her off from the water, and if you've got like a half-size army to help defend Arnheim, or it's leveled up enough to the point where you put the walls in here, right? Now she's trapped out here and has to force a fight with Tiranoc or try to come back and fight you. Or like maybe she just like you catch her out at sea when she's retreating from or returning from a successful fight at Tiranoc. In general, you want to kind of use Tiranoc as bait to create an opportunity for yourself to gain a significant advantage over her and be able to start taking some of this territory. Because this is the province you want, right? There's, as you can see, there's like, well, if you're familiar with it, there's a strategic building in here that produces a bunch of money and growth. Every one of these settlements has a different trade resource, right? You can make a ton of money off of this province, but just the fact that it has 4 settlements means that this is also going to be your like main military recruitment center until you can start confederating some of the High Elves, particularly Lothern, right? So that's really what you want. So that's kind of what your goal is, right? Take out the Bleakholds, try to have these three settlements and be able to control them. You'll have these 2 here, and then hopefully you'll get this entire province. The Lizardmen might snipe a settlement or 2 from you, but they probably won't be able to hold it because of the chaos, corruption, and the public order. There will eventually be a rebellion, so you can kind of pick up the city if you're paying attention to that. But yeah, it's also possible that Nagarythe, a lot of times I end up seeing her before she dies off. She'll confederate Clark-Carrand and will jump to the north. But that's why you want to just assume that Val's Anvil will be attacked and start prepping your defenses there. The Skaven might even find, like, Clan Rictus might find you and just be like, hey, I'm going to attack you now when you're busy dealing with Nagarythe. So those are your main considerations here for the early game. Right? Once you have, like, these 2 provinces and some of these settlements, that's kind of the first phase, right? That's where you want to settle things down, take a minute to grow, try to build your diplomatic relations, and maybe do some confederations with the High Elves, and prepare to move into the next phase, okay? So, let's talk about that next phase. Let's talk about the long-term strategy and campaign approach, okay? Once you've taken these early provinces, you're confident you can defend Val's Anvil, and it's time to make your next decision, right? Basically, your options are this, okay? You could fight the Lizardmen. Well, fight or befriend the Lizardmen, fight or befriend the High Elves, fight the Dark Elves, right? The Lizardmen make for a pretty good target because their territory is valuable, right? Hexwaddle, I can't see it, but I know that there's a gold building in there, and their settlements are fairly defensible. Like, once you own this like central strip of Lustria, which is usually what they get control of sooner or later, it's just not that hard to hold, right? Like, it's easy enough to like station 1 army in the center and maybe have 1 on the flank eventually, or just wall up, right? Like, wall up your coastal settlements. it's fairly simple territory to defend. It's fairly valuable. That being said, the lizardmen also make a great trade partner. I think you can go either way here. It's really your preference. Their territory is no better and no worse for you than the High Elves' territory, as you can see. Both are unpleasant climate. So it's not like you're better off taking High Elf territory in terms of the climate suitability, right? In this campaign, I ended up just doing a non-aggression pact with them and focusing on confederating the High Elves and fighting the Dark Elves, right? Because ultimately the Dark Elves have the majority of the land that's actually suitable for you. With the High Elves, it kind of works the same way it always does, right? There's a bunch of minor factions. You can take it slow and confederate all of them. You can confederate half of them and fight the rest and like conquer them, right? Or you can just try to like fight them all. I mean, you're going to want to confederate Tyrion. You're going to want to confederate Avalorn. You want to have the legendary lords as much as you can. And with the amount of influence and diplomatic bonuses you'll be getting by following the Marked for Death mechanic, it should not be difficult to confederate as many of the High Elves as you want. That's kind of the route that I went. I definitely confederated more than I need to because, of course, you get those public order penalties. But the diplomatic penalties really aren't that bad. But yeah, that's you know, like I said, you kind of have whatever options. I would kind of recommend at least confederating one or two, like getting Tor Anrock and taking it at a decent strength. Like there's a gold building here as well, right? There's a gold and a port. It's not a super valuable province, but just that gold building alone in the early game, that will help propel you so much and basically will supply your war with the Dark Elves wherever you want to fight. If the Scourge of Cain is still alive at that time, it's a great time to take over this province because this is suitable for you as well. Gives you a foothold on the island, allows you to meet people. But yeah, you kind of have to make your own decision about that, right? It's very easy to just confederate all the High Elves in this campaign. It's also not too difficult to go to war with them if you gain sufficient momentum and build up from these first few provinces, right? The last question is really like the Dark Elves, which isn't really a question, right? You're going to fight them. You don't want to ally the Dark Elves, and they have the most valuable territory for you to take, right? So really your decision is, like, do I fight the Lizardmen first or the Dark Elves first? And how many of the High Elves do I want to fight? Or how long do I want to, like, wait with confederations to kind of get, you know, like how desperate am I to control this whole island and take it through confederations versus how much do I want to focus on the war and, like, pushing my territory forward, right? So those are the kind of things that you have to think about. I don't know, balance it as much or as little as you want. Go to war with whichever side you want. Like I said, I think that the Lizardmen are a good option for like diplomacy first, war perhaps later. The Dark Elves, great option for war first. High Elves should be easy enough to confederate the whole deal. The other real, besides that, you also probably want to find some people in the old world, right? The Empire, Bretonnians, Tomb Kings would be good to discover. Those are good people to set up some trade agreements with and really get your money rolling. And then the last main points that I want to bring up. So the first is consider the pacing of your war against the Dark Elves and the timing of the Chaos Invasion, right? On the current patch, in my experience, playing on hard and very hard campaign with like normal or hard Chaos Invasion difficulty, they always invade between turn 90 and 100 every time. So if you are like keep in mind, depending on how far north you get, if you're hitting Nagarythe right around turn 91, you're going to have to be the one to fight Chaos pretty much head on. So you either want to make sure that you can get like a good chunk of territory that you can kind of hold on to and be able to repel Chaos at the entrances by turn 90, or you want to kind of hide on the other side of the river, right? Maybe take territory right up to this coastline on the north side. I think that's a good goal for turn 90 because then you'll probably get there by turn 70 or 80, but you can spend those turns, right, confederating more people on Ulthuan, and then just like being able to sit here and build up these settlements, protect them, and keep the public order in check, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. Chaos will spawn between turn 90 and 100. Don't forget about that as you're fighting the Dark Elves. You don't want to leave yourself vulnerable or spread yourself too thin and end up like losing all the territory that you just took from them, right? That would be pointless. The one other thing that I think you should consider is if you're getting bored in the late game, like who do you fight, right? We could break non-aggression with the lizardmen and fight them. Maybe we like push onto the like old world mainland, depending on how the vampire coasts are doing, or maybe we don't even like Reichland. Maybe we decide we want to put down the Norscan threat. I think one of your better options is actually to attack the greenskins, and on this campaign particularly, right? For two reasons. One, remember, suitable climate wasteland. That's all of this. That's all of this. The mountains are going to be, mediocre or like moderate still, but the Badlands are going to be fine for you. This is going to be the remaining like best suitable climate for you in the game. And second, you have the Underway, right? You have the Underway stance as this faction. So this would be like the one time as a non-dwarf, non-skaven, non-greenskin that taking over all of these mountains won't be an absolute nightmare. So if you're looking for something fun to do and you're determined to like complete the campaign and achieve all the victory conditions and you have nothing to do for 50 turns, go and fight the greenskins, right? That's a great thing you can do. I mean, there's plenty of options, right? Fighting the lizardmen is a fine option. Seeing if there's any remnants of like the vampire coast or the dark elves down here is not a bad option. But yeah, I think that like the solution to boredom for late game in this campaign, if any campaign is best for fighting the greenskins outside with like non-underway faction, it's this faction because they have the a non-underway race. This faction still has the underway, right? So I hope that makes sense. With that being said, that covers everything that I wanted to for this campaign introduction. Hopefully that's some good pointers for you, kind of some strategy about how to build your first few provinces, what to target, what kind of pacing your campaign should have, what your focus for military units should be. I know that it's nothing special, but I feel like that's just how it goes for the High Elves. And then like who's your friends, who's your foes, and what kind of shape, like what course does a proper campaign take, and what's the best way to achieve that over the course of the next 200 turns or so. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments, or if you have a video or a faction you'd like to see me focus on next, I would love to hear it. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.